The introductory music to Doctor Who, with its electronic swirl of woohoos, is one of the medium's most famous theme tunes. But the creators of the piece, Ron Grainer and Delia Derbyshire, were both dead when the show returned to BBC One 8 years ago. And so the task of rearranging the credit music and creating original soundtracks for the new episodes was given to my next guest, writer and composer Murray Gold. His tunes for Who feature in 2 concerts this weekend at the BBC Proms, where they'll be performed by the BBC National Orchestra of Wales. This, I suggested to Murray Gold, is an example of compositions that are often called background music coming to the foreground.
It's a great privilege. I think everyone who writes background music would love to have the same treatment.
And do you, the experience of hearing it played in that way, the first time, did it surprise you?
I think the hush before it all begins and where you actually see the scale of it. I write quite big. I write to be heard at the back row. So that suits an audience being present because there's a lot of strong rather than subtle emotions flying around. And when you have strong emotions in an auditorium, it's a really great feeling.
I took offence on your behalf. In the Proms official guide, I turned to the biographies of composers, and after Philip Glass and before Sophia Gubaidulina, there's no Murray Gold.
I mean, that might be the last vestiges of a high versus low culture war.
Well, that's why I asked. I did wonder about this, that it's as if what you've done is off to one side somehow.
Yeah. Well, that's not my battle to fight, I wouldn't have thought.
Oh, it is, but you have got a dog in that fight because you compose the music. One definition is that they say new compositions, but in fact you have a new composition in as well.
Yeah, which I hope is enjoyed as much as the other new compositions that will be debuting this season. I suppose I have a very slight leaning towards the elite in the high versus low culture war. And the Proms as a whole, there aren't that many opportunities for really tough, gritty, modernist composers to have a go at having their music played in front of a big audience, a massive audience. As your humble representative of the low culture here, I'd defer to them, and if they left me out of the programme, I don't mind too much.
But your new composition, which I only have the lyrics because it hasn't been performed yet,
right,
is Song for 50, and this is your tribute to the 5 decades of the Doctor.
Yeah. Well, we thought it would be appropriate to write something to commemorate the birthday. So essentially, happy birthday to a lovely television show.
Happy birthday to who?
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly. And I think the last words are "Happy birthday, Dr. You," which I'm sure the whole audience is going to mishear and say, you must never call him by that name. But it was really the fact that, because I've been in the Royal Albert Hall twice with this body of music, I know how people react. And it's a real privilege to be able to write directly for an audience that you know. So I wrote this, well, it's effectively a long song, to speak for everybody in that room.
When you took on this commission 8 years ago now, did you have any, you probably didn't write them down, did you have any sort of general principles? Because obviously you had to honour, and you have indeed rearranged, that original, that famous piece of music, the Delia Derbyshire and Ron Grainer, the Woohoo, you had to incorporate that rather than work against it.
I don't use that melody in the incidental music at all. I think initially it was because we weren't 100% sure who even owned the copyright to it. I think subsequently we discovered it was possible to use it, but I never have. So in fact, right from the get-go, the object became, how do we create a sort of musical history for this show? It was more conventional film scoring rather than the avant-garde electronic style of music that was prior to Christopher Eccleston's Doctor. But I didn't realise that by 2013 I would still be doing it.
And when they're in the concerts, they're individual pieces with titles such as I Am the Doctor. Do you think of them as title compositions when you're working on them?
I do think of them being performed as individual pieces. Something I've always done when I've written for television, maybe less so for film, but is I've tried to give something very memorable from the outset and play it enough times that it's stuck by the end of the first episode, because you can't underestimate the usefulness of the recognition of the audience for melodies. for better or for worse, I like to have a certain type of melody, a sort of slow, developing melody with a sense of triumph about it. You know, the idea of embattled people, in the Doctor's case, not that he's embattled, but he's a bit of a nerd. You know, a bit like the Smiths would write anthems for the defeated. I would always test them out on people and say, what do you hear in this? What kind of emotion do you feel? Because, you know, it's just a very democratic medium, television, and you want it to travel. You want it to resonate with as many people as possible, as quickly as possible.
And one of the big questions, I assume, for someone composing screen music is the expectations, the cliches. So, for example, Last Tango in Halifax is a sort of love story. Scott and Bailey is a sort of cop show, although they vary from that. But there would be viewers, there might even be producers, God forbid, who expect certain kinds of music for that. And that's something you have to fight, isn't it?
Well, I suppose I sort of made that my brand right at the beginning. I mean, the first job I did really for the BBC was Vanity Fair, and we had a sort of Kurt Weill brass band, and it was all the wrong century and everything about the, you know, it was all anachronistic. And then Queer as Folk, instead of having the sort of four to the floor sort of house music type of thing, had more of an Eddie Cochran kind of 50s feel almost to it. But it's always about, you know, I can see what the first guess is, what might be the second. I think more people do that now, so maybe I should just go back to the first guesses.
Well, no, that's my theory about you, that what you do, you write the obvious scores for Last Tango in Halifax and then Scott and Bailey, and then you just offer them to the other producer. That's the trick.
You've seen right through me. It's true.
You have to have a view on this. Maybe you know. Have you seen a secret memo anywhere on saying who the new Doctor
is?
I
was just sitting downstairs and the new exec producer of Doctor Who walked in. He said, Murray, you're supposed to be in America. What are you doing here? And I said, I'm just doing front row. And what are you doing here? And then he just winked at me. And I said, I'm going to steal your Filofax. It's in there. It's in there, isn't it? And he said, no.
Do you think somewhere in this building they're down there meeting the new Doctor, maybe?
Who knows? I honestly have no idea. I'm just the organ grinder.
Do you have a view, though? Male, female, younger, older?
You know, so long as they get good scripts, so long as it's full of heart and generosity, that's all that matters with the show. And masses of imagination on top of a lot of heart and generosity. And I'll go with Toto, if that was what he gave us.
And the technology for composing music, I mean, you, in some ways, you're the lucky generation. You've probably seen those photographs I have of people like Elmer Bernstein who would be sitting in this Hollywood screening theatre with the film being projected, and they'd have a piano down the front. Whereas if you want, you can have everything on a laptop, can't you?
I travel around with this 15-inch computer, and I do absolutely everything on it, wherever I am. I mean, be it in a hotel in Vancouver or on the plane over the Atlantic or whatever. And I was there for the tail end of things being difficult to do, and you never knew how your music worked with a show until you saw it at the screening. You could see an individual cue, but running them into each other was really difficult. Or you might even have forgotten that a new piece of music started 3 seconds after the last one ended because you hadn't consulted your little fact sheet that you had to make with all the timings on it. And the night before a recording session, you had to make sure everything was recorded on these ADATs and you had to stack them one on top of the other. So even in my generation, it was complicated. But then when you have a problem, but you have an idea in your head, rather than having just a bunch of solutions and no idea in your head, sometimes that can make a better piece of work. Delia Derbyshire being the actual proof of that, because she clearly heard what she wanted for Ron Grainer's theme and then had all of her assistants stretch all of the 4 tapes she needed to make that theme up around the corridors of the BBC, and then 4 other people to press play at the right time and record it all to a master tape. So it was a very long mechanical process to get a really great piece of music.
But in theory, you can sit on a plane with the rough cut of Doctor Who and compose. They'll probably stop you doing it now with the new Doctor in case someone leans over
well,
from
I had the
next
50,
seat.
I flew over the night before last and I had the 50th on my lap, and I did constantly check over my shoulder for any potential Doctor Who spies. But it was mostly stewardesses just asking me what I was up to, and I just said, oh, it's just a hobby.
Murray Gold, the Doctor Who Proms are at the Royal Albert Hall in London on Saturday at 7:30pm, also broadcast live on BBC Radio 3, and on Sunday at 10:30am.